My father always told me that life is built on routines. Michael, he'd say, find your rhythm and stick to it. For 34 years of marriage with Kate, I had done exactly that. We had our morning coffee together at 6:30, our weekend barbecues, our vacation to the lake house every July. I fixed things around the house. She managed our social calendar. It wasn't exciting, but it was comfortable, reliable. At 58, I had settled into semi-retirement as a safety consultant, which suited me fine. After decades as an industrial engineer, I'd earned the right to slow down. My mind, though, never quite got the memo about retirement. I still noticed details others missed, discrepancies in patterns, things out of place. It's what made me good at my job, and what Kate used to call my engineer's obsession. "Not everything needs to be analyzed, Michael," she'd say, with that half-smile I'd fallen for back in '89. Maybe she was right. Maybe some things are better left unexamined. But that's not how I'm wired. It was a Tuesday in October when I found it. Nothing special about the day otherwise. I'd stopped at Kroger on the way home to pick up steaks for dinner. When I got back to my car and tossed the grocery bag onto the passenger seat, something white caught my eye on the floor mat. A business card, plain white, with black lettering. Edward Carlson, Personal Training and Fitness, 17 Westlake Drive. I turned it over in my hand, trying to place it. I had never been to any gym on Westlake Drive. Hell, I hadn't been to any gym in years, unless you count the occasional hotel fitness center during work trips. I slipped the card into my wallet without much thought. Probably fell out of someone else's pocket. The car had been in for service last week. That evening, as Kate was chopping vegetables and I was seasoning the steaks, I remembered the card. "Hey, do you know anyone named Edward Carlson?" I asked casually. The knife in her hand paused for just a fraction of a second. Most people wouldn't have noticed. I did. "Edward Carlson," she repeated, resuming her chopping. "Oh, that must be from Jenny's son-in-law. He opened some fitness studio recently. She was passing out his cards at the office." I said, turning back to the steaks. "Found it in the car. Weird." "Well, you know how things end up everywhere," she laughed. "Remember when we found that movie ticket stub from 2018 behind the couch?" I laughed too. But something felt off. Kate's explanation came a little too quickly, a little too neatly packaged, and Kate had always proclaimed her hatred for gyms. Glorified torture chambers for people with too much money and time, she'd call them. Later that night, I took out the card again and Googled the address. It wasn't a big commercial gym. It was a small, private studio in a converted warehouse. Exclusive, expensive, and 15 miles in the opposite direction from Kate's office. I put the card back in my wallet. Probably nothing. Just my engineer's mind seeing patterns where none existed. But the next morning, I noticed Kate checking her phone more often than usual. And when she kissed me goodbye, I caught a whiff of a perfume I hadn't smelled before. Sometimes the smallest things unravel the largest truths. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. For 3 days, I carried that business card in my wallet like a splinter under my skin, irritating, impossible to ignore. On Friday morning, I sat at our kitchen table while Kate rushed through breakfast. 34 years of marriage gives you a baseline, a sense of normal. And this wasn't it. She'd been leaving for work earlier, coming home with her hair slightly different than when she left. Small things. Engineer's details. "I might go check out that gym," I said, watching her over my coffee mug. Kate nearly choked on her toast. "What gym?" "The one on that card? The personal trainer place?" "Oh," she recovered quickly, spreading jam with too much focus. "Why would you do that? You always said gyms are for people trying to outrun old age." "That was your line, not mine," I corrected her. "You're the one who hates gyms." Her eyes flicked up to mine, then away. Right. I just don't think it's worth the money." After she left, I pulled out the business card again. Jenny's son-in-law, she'd said. Jenny Kolchak had been Kate's co-worker for nearly a decade. We had dinner with her and her husband every few months. I knew their daughter had married some finance guy named Paul. I picked up my phone and called Jenny, using the excuse of organizing a dinner get-together. "How's Sarah doing with the new baby?" I asked after the pleasantries. "And how's Paul handling fatherhood?" "Oh, they're wonderful. Paul took a week off work to help out." "That's great," I said, feeling a cold weight settle in my stomach. "Hey, didn't Paul's brother open a gym or something recently? Kate mentioned it." "Paul's an only child," Jenny said, confusion in her voice. "Maybe Kate was thinking of someone else?" "Maybe," I said lightly. "My mistake." After we hung up, I sat in silence. Kate had lied. It wasn't some mix-up or confusion. She'd created an entire story about Jenny's non-existent son-in-law. That afternoon, I drove to 17 Westlake Drive. The studio was sleek and modern, tucked between an artisanal coffee shop and a boutique clothing store. Carlson Fitness read the understated sign. Through the glass front, I could see training equipment and what looked like private workout rooms. I parked across the street and watched for an hour, feeling ridiculous and sick at the same time. A few people came and went, mostly women in their 40s and 50s, professionally dressed. The kind of clientele who could afford $100 an hour for someone to count their squats. As I was about to leave, a man emerged from the studio. Tall, maybe early 40s, with the kind of muscular build that spoke of a lifetime of discipline. He smiled and chatted with an older woman client, then checked his watch and looked up and down the street expectantly. Edward Carlson, I presumed, looking for someone. I started my car and drove away, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. That night, I couldn't sleep. Kate lay beside me, her breathing deep and regular, completely unaware of the storm brewing inside me. I stared at the ceiling, replaying years of marriage in my mind, searching for signs I might have missed. Had there been other lies, other men? The questions multiplied like cancer cells. By morning, I'd made a decision. I would not confront her yet, not until I knew exactly what I was dealing with. The engineer in me needed data, evidence, and a plan. I checked our shared credit card statements over breakfast while Kate was in the shower. Nothing obvious jumped out at first. Then I noticed a pattern of gas station charges. Kate worked from home 2 days a week, and her office was only 3 miles away. She shouldn't be filling up twice a week. When she came downstairs, I'd switched to reading the news on my tablet. "I might be late tonight," she said, pouring coffee into her travel mug. "Quarterly reports are due Monday." "No problem," I replied, not looking up. "I'll probably just watch the game." I spent the morning in my home office organizing my thoughts. I created a spreadsheet of Kate's working hours, her supposed location, based on what she'd told me, and the gaps I'd identified. Tuesday and Thursday mornings showed the most discrepancies over the past month. At lunch, I drove back to Carlson Fitness and parked where I could see the entrance. This time, I brought a book as cover and settled in to wait. Just after 1 o'clock, my patience was rewarded. A silver Lexus pulled into the parking lot, Kate's Lexus. My heart hammered against my ribs as I watched my wife of 34 years step out of her car. She was wearing business attire, the same outfit she'd left home in that morning, not workout clothes. She checked her makeup in the car window, then walked inside. I felt nauseous. Part of me wanted to storm in there, to catch them in whatever they were doing. But another part, the calculating part, held me back. I needed to understand the full scope of the betrayal. 15 minutes later, Kate emerged with him, Edward Carlson. They stood close together near the entrance, talking intently. Then he leaned down and kissed her cheek, letting his hand linger on her arm a moment too long. My vision blurred. I gripped the steering wheel to steady myself, fighting back the urge to vomit. 34 years reduced to this sidewalk moment. Kate got back in her car and drove away. She didn't see me. She didn't see how my world had just collapsed. I sat there for another 20 minutes, my mind cycling through rage, disbelief, and a crushing sadness. When I could finally trust myself to drive, I went home and poured myself a scotch, planning my next move. By the time Kate came home that evening, I'd managed to compose myself, barely. I sat in the living room with a second scotch, pretending to watch a baseball game I couldn't have cared less about. "Hey," she said, setting her purse down on the counter. "Sorry I'm late. Those reports were a nightmare." I looked at her, really looked at her, the slight flush to her cheeks, the careful way she was avoiding extended eye contact. My wife, the stranger. "No problem," I said, raising my glass slightly. "Dinner's in the fridge if you want it." "Thanks, but I grabbed something at the office." Another lie. "I'm exhausted. Mind if I just head up to bed?" "Go ahead. I'll be up later." She kissed the top of my head, a gesture so familiar it now felt like a mockery, and went upstairs. I heard the shower start running. Washing away evidence, I wondered, the thought bitter as bile. I finished my drink and poured another, something I rarely did. But tonight was different. Tonight, I needed the numbing effect as I considered my options. I could confront her immediately, demand answers. But what would that accomplish? Tears, denials, maybe a partial confession crafted to minimize the damage. No, I deserved the whole truth. I could follow her more, gather irrefutable evidence, take photos, record times and dates, build a case so solid she couldn't wriggle out with half-truths. Or I could just leave, pack a bag and disappear, let her wonder what happened until the divorce papers arrived. The last option was tempting in my anger, but not practical. Our finances were too entangled, our lives too connected, and something deeper, something primal in me wanted her to face what she'd done. I wanted to see the moment when she realized she couldn't lie anymore. The shower upstairs stopped. I heard Kate moving around in our bedroom, the familiar creaking of floorboards that I'd grown accustomed to over decades. I pulled out my phone and opened the browser. "Edward Carlson Fitness Trainer," I typed, then hit search. His website appeared immediately, professional photos of him working with clients, testimonials, pricing packages. And there, under About Me, a brief biography, former college athlete, certified personal trainer for 15 years, specialized in helping clients over 40 reach their fitness goals. I scrolled through his social media. No mention of Kate anywhere, which wasn't surprising. Men like him were careful. But there were photos of him at local events, always well-dressed, sometimes with an attractive woman who wasn't my wife. I heard Kate's bedside lamp click off upstairs. Tomorrow was Thursday, her regular training day. I closed my eyes and made my decision. Tomorrow, I would get answers. I woke up before the alarm, my mouth dry from the scotch and my mind racing. Kate was still asleep beside me, her face peaceful. I studied her features, the same face I'd woken up to for over 3 decades, the face I thought I knew better than my own. I slipped out of bed quietly and headed downstairs to make coffee. By the time Kate joined me, dressed for work in a pencil skirt and silk blouse, I was already on my second cup. "You're up early?" she commented, reaching for a mug. "Couldn't sleep," I replied truthfully, "thinking about a site inspection I need to do today." "Safety never sleeps, huh?" She smiled, a brief flash of the woman I'd married. "I might be late again tonight. The quarterly numbers are still a mess." I nodded, watching her over my mug. "No problem. Do what you need to do." 30 minutes later, she kissed me goodbye and left in her Lexus. I waited exactly 15 minutes, then got into my car and followed her. I kept a safe distance behind, though I already knew where she was going. Sure enough, Kate drove directly to Carlson Fitness. No stops, no detours. Just a straight line from our house to her lover. I parked across the street again, but didn't get out. Instead, I pulled out my phone and called Kate's cell. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. "Hey, it's me," I said after the beep. Just realized I left some files at home that I need for today's inspection. Might need to reschedule with the client. Call me when you get this." I ended the call and waited. If she was really at work, she'd call back within minutes. She always kept her phone on her desk. 10 minutes passed. 20. No return call. I decided to change tactics. I texted her. "Forgot to ask, do we need anything from the store for dinner?" This time, she responded almost immediately. "Maybe some wine? Whatever you want to make is fine." I stared at her message, feeling a new wave of anger wash over me. She was texting me from inside that gym, probably between sets with her trainer, acting as if everything was normal. I looked up at the fitness studio's entrance and made an impulsive decision. I got out of my car, crossed the street, and walked inside. The reception area was minimalist and expensive looking. A young woman with a perfect ponytail looked up from behind a sleek desk. "Good morning. Do you have an appointment?" "No," I said, glancing around. "I was actually hoping to speak with Edward Carlson about personal training." "Mr. Carlson is with a client right now," she said, checking her computer. "I can schedule you for a consultation tomorrow if you'd like." "That's all right," I said, moving toward a water dispenser in the corner to buy time. "I'll just wait a few minutes. A friend of mine recommended him highly." The receptionist looked uncertain, but nodded. He should be finished in about 20 minutes. I poured myself some water and took a seat in the waiting area, positioning myself where I could see down the hallway that led to what I assumed were the private training rooms. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my temples. What exactly was I doing? What would I say if Kate walked out and saw me sitting here? But I couldn't leave. I needed to see it with my own eyes. No more assumptions, no more detective work. Just the cold, hard truth. 15 excruciating minutes later, a door opened at the end of the hallway. I heard laughter, a woman's voice, then a man's deeper response. I leaned forward in my chair, straining to see. Kate emerged first, dressed not in workout clothes, but in the same business outfit she'd left home in. Her hair was slightly mussed, her lipstick freshly applied. Behind her came Edward Carlson, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back. I stood up abruptly, the paper cup of water falling from my hand. Kate saw me and froze, her face draining of color. "Michael," she whispered, barely audible across the room. Edward Carlson, to his credit, immediately removed his hand from my wife's back. He looked between us, confusion giving way to understanding. "What a surprise," I said, my voice sounding strange even to my own ears. "I was just looking for a personal trainer. Looks like you found a good one, Kate." The receptionist was staring at us, wide-eyed. Another client waiting in the corner shifted uncomfortably. "Michael, I can explain," Kate started, taking a step toward me. "Can you?" My voice was eerily calm despite the hurricane raging inside me. "I'd love to hear it." The silence in the gym stretched like a rubber band about to snap. Kate stood frozen, her face a mask of shock and guilt. Edward Carlson shifted his weight, clearly uncomfortable, but not backing away. "Perhaps we should take this somewhere private," he finally suggested, gesturing toward one of the rooms. "I don't think that's necessary," I replied, my voice still unnaturally steady. "I think I've seen everything I need to see." "Michael, please." Kate took another step toward me. "This isn't what it looks like," I finished for her. "That's what people say in movies, Kate. Is that really the best you can do after 34 years? The receptionist was now pretending very hard to be busy with her computer. The other waiting client had mysteriously disappeared. Kate glanced around, acutely aware of our audience. "Can we please talk about this at home?" she whispered urgently. "Sure," I said, turning toward the door. "Let's do that." I walked out without waiting to see if she would follow. When I reached my car, I sat behind the wheel and watched the gym entrance. A minute later, Kate emerged alone. She stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking lost, then walked slowly to her Lexus. I started my engine and pulled out before she reached her car. I needed those few extra minutes at home to prepare myself. The drive back was a blur. My mind kept replaying the image of them together, his hand on her back. It wasn't even the physical betrayal that cut deepest. It was the lies, the elaborate deception, the realization that the woman I'd built my life with was capable of such calculated dishonesty. When I pulled into our driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, gathering my strength. Then I went inside, poured myself another drink despite the early hour, and waited. Kate arrived 15 minutes later. She entered cautiously, setting her purse down with deliberate care, as if any sudden movement might trigger an explosion. "Michael," she began, her voice trembling, "I am so sorry." "How long?" I asked simply. She sank onto the couch across from me. 6 months. The words hit like a physical blow. 6 months. Half a year of deception. So when we were celebrating our anniversary in June, "It wasn't serious then," she said quickly, tears starting to form. "It was just, I don't know." "Just what? Just sex? Just an emotional affair? Just destroying our marriage?" My calm was beginning to crack. "Help me understand, Kate, because right now I'm having trouble recognizing the woman sitting in front of me." "I never meant to hurt you," she said, tears now flowing freely. "It just happened. I was feeling invisible, unappreciated. Edward made me feel alive again." "And I didn't?" The question came out more wounded than angry. "After 3 decades together, you couldn't talk to me about feeling invisible." "You've been so wrapped up in your consulting work since semi-retirement," she said defensively. "Always analyzing things, fixing problems, but never really seeing me anymore." I laughed without humor. "So this is my fault? I work too much, therefore you sleep with your trainer?" "No, I'm not saying that." She wiped at her tears. "I made a terrible mistake. I got caught up in something that made me feel good about myself again." "And lying to me every day, creating fake stories about Jenny's non-existent son-in-law, texting me from his gym pretending to be at work, were those mistakes too, or were those choices, Kate?" She flinched at each question. "I was a coward," she whispered. "I couldn't face hurting you." "But you did hurt me. You're still hurting me." I set my glass down with a thud. "What happens now? Do you love him?" "No," she said too quickly. I raised an eyebrow. "It's complicated," she amended, "but I love you, Michael. I always have." "That's a funny way of showing it." I stood up, suddenly needing to move. "Does anyone else know? Have you been laughing behind my back with your friends?" Poor clueless Michael, so busy with his safety inspections, he doesn't notice his wife is sleeping with her trainer. "No one knows," she said, shaking her head vigorously. "It wasn't like that." "Then what was it like?" I demanded, my voice rising. "Explain it to me, Kate. Help me understand how the woman I've loved since I was 24 could do this to me." She had no answer for that, just more tears. "I need some air," I said, grabbing my car keys again. "Don't wait up." "Michael, please don't go," she begged, standing up. "We need to talk about this." "We will," I said, pausing at the door. "But right now, if I stay, I'll say things I might regret. And unlike you, I try not to make mistakes I can't take back." I closed the door on her protests and walked back to my car, hands shaking with rage and grief. As I drove away, one thought kept circling in my mind. Nothing would ever be the same again. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually ending up at a bar I'd never been to before. I didn't want to run into anyone I knew. I didn't want to explain why Michael Brown, reliable family man and occasional Scotch drinker, was sitting alone on a Thursday afternoon, staring into a glass of bourbon like it contained the secrets of the universe. The bartender, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, seemed to recognize the look of a man in crisis. She kept my drinks coming without unnecessary conversation, just an occasional, "You okay there?" to which I'd nod, mutely. After my third bourbon, I pulled out my phone. 7 missed calls from Kate, 3 voicemails, a dozen text messages ranging from apologetic to panicked. I ignored them all and pulled up my contacts. I needed someone to talk to, someone who wasn't Kate. But looking through my list, I realized something depressing. Almost all of our close friends were shared friends, couples we'd known together for years, people who would be caught in the middle of this mess. Finally, I called my brother Jim. He lived in Phoenix now, far enough away to be removed from our social circle, but close enough to still know Kate well. "Michael," he answered, surprise in his voice. We usually texted, rarely called. "Everything all right?" "Not really," I admitted, my voice slightly slurred. "Kate's been having an affair." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "Jesus Christ," he finally said. "Are you sure?" "Caught her red-handed today, with her personal trainer." Even saying it out loud felt surreal, like I was describing someone else's life. "Shit, Mike. I'm sorry. What are you going to do?" "I don't know," I answered truthfully. "I'm sitting in some bar getting drunk. Seemed like a good first step." "Where are you? Do you need me to come up there?" I looked around the dim bar. "No, don't do that. I just needed to tell someone who knows us both." "I can be on a flight tomorrow," he insisted. "It's fine, Jim. Really, I'm a big boy." "Look, Mike, I know you. You're going to try to handle this all on your own, be the stoic engineer, but this is big. This is Kate we're talking about." "Yeah," I said, feeling the weight of those words. Kate. My Kate. Only she wasn't mine anymore, was she? I'll figure it out. After promising to call him tomorrow, I hung up and ordered coffee instead of another bourbon. I needed to clear my head. The bartender gave me an approving nod as she set the mug in front of me. "Whoever she is," she said, "she ain't worth driving into a telephone pole over." I managed a weak smile. That obvious, huh? "Honey, I've been tending bar for 20 years. I know that my wife is cheating face when I see it." I drank my coffee slowly, letting the bitter liquid and the conversation with Jim bring my thoughts into slightly sharper focus. I had to decide what to do next. Go home and face Kate? Get a hotel room? Call a lawyer? The last option made my stomach turn. Divorce. After 34 years. The word itself felt wrong in my mouth, like trying to speak a foreign language. But what were the alternatives? Forgiveness, reconciliation, marriage counseling where we'd sit in matching chairs and talk about rebuilding trust? I thought about the look on Kate's face when she saw me in the gym, not just guilt or embarrassment, real fear of losing everything. Did that mean she still cared, or just that she was afraid of the consequences? By the time I paid my tab, it was after 9. I hadn't eaten since breakfast and felt lightheaded from the combination of alcohol, caffeine, and emotional exhaustion. I stopped at a drive-thru for a burger I couldn't taste, then pointed my car toward home. Our house was still lit up when I pulled into the driveway. Kate's car was there. Of course it was. Where else would she go? This was her home, too. The place we'd built our life together. The thought that had once brought me comfort now felt like another betrayal. I sat in the car for a few minutes, gathering my courage. Then I walked to the front door, my key hovering over the lock. I almost knocked, feeling suddenly like a visitor to my own home. When I opened the door, the living room was empty, but I could hear movement upstairs. I hung my keys on their hook, a small, normal action that felt absurdly out of place in the chaos of the day. "Michael?" Kate's voice carried from upstairs, followed by quick footsteps. She appeared at the top of the stairs, her face puffy from crying, wearing an old T-shirt of mine she often slept in. Thank God, I was worried sick. "I'm back," I said flatly, unable to muster anything more. She came down the stairs slowly, stopping a few feet away from me, clearly uncertain whether she was allowed to approach closer. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, "for everything." I looked at her, really looked at her, my wife, my betrayer, the love of my life, the source of my pain, all these contradictions in one person. "We need to talk," I said finally, "but not tonight. I'm exhausted, Kate, and I'm still too angry to have a reasonable conversation." She nodded, tears threatening again. "Where will you sleep?" The question hung between us, heavy with implication. The guest room, I decided. For now. For now. Two small words that carried the weight of our uncertain future. Morning came too quickly. I woke disoriented in the guest room, momentarily confused by the unfamiliar angle of sunlight through the blinds. Then it all came rushing back. The gym, the confrontation, Kate's confession, 6 months of lies exposed in a single day. I lay there listening to the house. The shower running in the master bathroom, cabinet doors opening and closing in the kitchen, normal sounds of a weekday morning in the Brown household, except nothing was normal anymore. Eventually, I forced myself to get up. I had slept in my clothes, so I quietly slipped into the master bedroom to get fresh ones while Kate was showering. Her phone was on the nightstand, face down. I stared at it for a long moment, tempted to look through her messages to see what she had written to him. But what would that accomplish except more pain? I grabbed clothes and retreated to the guest room, changing quickly. By the time I came downstairs, Kate was in the kitchen making coffee, dressed for work in a conservative pantsuit I hadn't seen in years. "Good morning," she said tentatively. "I made coffee." "Thanks," I replied, accepting the mug she offered but maintaining my distance. She leaned against the counter, her own mug clutched tightly in both hands. "I called in sick today. I thought we should talk." I nodded, taking a careful sip. "Probably a good idea. I also—" She hesitated. I texted Edward. I told him I couldn't see him anymore, that what happened was a terrible mistake. "You ended it over text?" I couldn't help the bitter laugh that escaped. How very high school. "I didn't want to see him in person," she said defensively. "I wanted to be done with it immediately." "What did he say?" "He understood. Said he was sorry for the pain he caused." "How noble of him," I muttered. We stood in awkward silence, drinking our coffee on opposite sides of the kitchen we had remodeled together 5 years ago. The granite countertops we had spent weeks selecting now seemed like artifacts from another lifetime. "Michael," Kate finally broke the silence. "What happens now? With us?" The question I'd been dreading, the one I didn't have an answer for. "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know if I can get past this." "I want to try," she said quickly. "Whatever it takes. Counseling, transparency, anything." "It's not that simple, Kate. You broke something fundamental between us. Trust isn't like a vase you can glue back together." "I know." Her voice cracked. "But 34 years has to count for something. We built a life together." "And you were willing to risk all of it for what? Some excitement? A fantasy?" "It wasn't about him specifically," she said, setting her mug down. "It was about feeling wanted again, desired. When was the last time you really looked at me, Michael? Not as your wife, your partner, but as a woman?" I started to protest, then stopped myself. When had I last truly seen her that way? We had fallen into comfortable patterns years ago. Sex had become infrequent, perfunctory, but that didn't excuse what she'd done. "So I'm partly to blame?" I asked, the edge returning to my voice. "No," she backtracked. "The affair was entirely my fault, my choice, my terrible, selfish choice. But if we're going to fix us, we need to be honest about what was broken before." I sat down at the kitchen table, suddenly feeling exhausted despite having just woken up. "I need time, Kate. I can't just forgive and forget." "I'm not asking you to forget," she said, finally crossing the kitchen to sit across from me. "I'm asking for a chance to earn back your trust." "I'm not sure that's possible," I said truthfully. "Maybe not," she acknowledged. "But isn't it worth trying? After everything we've shared?" I looked at her, the woman I had loved for most of my life, the woman who had betrayed me in the most intimate way possible. Could we rebuild from these ashes? Did I even want to? I need time, I repeated, and space. I can't make this decision right now. She nodded, fighting back tears. Whatever you need, I'm not going anywhere. The irony of her statement hung in the air between us. She had gone somewhere, into another man's arms, and now she was asking me to believe it would never happen again. The next few days passed in a surreal haze. Kate and I moved around each other like wary strangers sharing temporary accommodations. I continued sleeping in the guest room. She continued saying, "I'm sorry," in a dozen different ways, through words, through gestures, through the desperate looks she gave me when she thought I wasn't paying attention. I threw myself into work, taking on more safety consultations than usual. The methodical process of identifying hazards and calculating risks was comforting in its familiarity. Problems with clear solutions, unlike my marriage. On Tuesday evening, almost a week after the confrontation at the gym, I was in the guest room reviewing inspection reports when Kate knocked softly on the door. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated, then nodded, closing my laptop. She entered, but remained standing near the door, clutching a manila envelope. "I want to give you something," she said, "as a first step." She crossed the room and placed the envelope on the bed beside me. "What's this?" "Everything," she said simply. "All my passwords, email, social media, phone, bank accounts, my complete schedule, including where I'll be and who I'll be with. And," she faltered slightly, "my resignation letter from work." "Your resignation?" I looked up sharply. "Why would you quit your job?" "Because that's where I said I was when I was with him," she explained. "I can find another job, one that doesn't have those associations, one where I haven't been lying to my colleagues about my whereabouts." I stared at the envelope without opening it. The gesture was simultaneously meaningful and completely inadequate. "Kate, this isn't about monitoring you like a parolee. If we can't rebuild trust more organically than this, we might as well give up now." "I know," she said quickly, "but I wanted you to have the option. Complete transparency, no more secrets." I sighed deeply. "Have you talked to anyone about this? About what happened?" She shook her head. "Number, I didn't want to burden our friends or turn them against you if we work things out." "If," I repeated, the single word heavy with implication. "When," she corrected herself, a flash of determination crossing her face. "When we work things out." Her confidence irritated me. "Don't do that. Don't act like forgiveness is inevitable, like this is just a rough patch we'll get through." "I'm not," she insisted, sitting down on the edge of the bed, careful to maintain distance between us. "I know how serious this is. I know I've broken something precious, but I refuse to believe it's irreparable." "That's not your decision to make," I reminded her. "You're right." She looked down at her hands. "But it's not entirely yours either. This marriage belongs to both of us." "You should have remembered that before you slept with your trainer," I shot back, immediately regretting the harshness of my tone. Kate flinched but didn't retreat. "I deserve that. I deserve your anger. But Michael, at some point, we need to decide if we're going to try to heal or if we're going to keep inflicting new wounds." Her words hit home. Was that what I was doing? Using my pain as a weapon? "I've been thinking about counseling," I said after a long pause. "Marriage counseling." Hope flickered across her face. "Really?" "Don't get too excited," I cautioned. "I'm not making any promises, but I think we need a third party, someone objective who can help us navigate this mess." "I'll set it up," she said immediately. "Whenever, wherever you want." I nodded, then gestured to the envelope. "I appreciate the gesture with this, but I'm not going to monitor your every move. If you want to cheat again, passwords won't stop you." "I don't want to cheat again," she said, her voice breaking. "I never want to hurt you like that again." "But you did want to before," I pointed out. "Something was missing for you, something you found with him." She was quiet for a moment, considering. What was missing wasn't about you or about him specifically. It was about me, about feeling seen again, appreciated, alive. And now? Now I realize what really matters, she said softly. Now I understand what I truly stand to lose. I wasn't ready to be moved by her words, but something in me shifted slightly. Not forgiveness, not yet, but perhaps the first tentative step toward understanding. I'll look into counselors tomorrow, I said, effectively ending the conversation. She nodded and stood up. Thank you, Michael, for being willing to try. After she left, I picked up the envelope and turned it over in my hands. Part of me wanted to read every message, track every lie, understand the full scope of her deception. But another part, perhaps the wiser part, knew that path led only to more pain. I placed the envelope in my dresser drawer unopened. Whatever path we took from here, it wouldn't be paved with surveillance and suspicion. That night, for the first time since the confrontation, I slept without dreaming of them together. Dr. Eleanor Watson's office was decorated in soothing neutrals with abstract art on the walls, professionally calming like the woman herself. She was in her 60s with silver-streaked dark hair and glasses that she occasionally peered over when making a point. Kate and I sat on opposite ends of her beige couch, the distance between us a physical manifestation of our emotional separation. This was our third session. The first had been mostly logistics and background, 34 years of marriage condensed into clinical bullet points. The second had been Kate's turn to speak, to explain her affair from her perspective while I listened without interrupting. That had been one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Today was my turn. Michael, Dr. Watson said gently, would you share with Kate how her affair has affected you? I cleared my throat, suddenly finding it difficult to speak. I'd rehearsed this in my head countless times, but saying it out loud with Kate watching was different. I paused, searching for the right word. Erased, like the life we built together has been retroactively invalidated. Kate made a small sound, but Dr. Watson held up a hand, reminding her it was my time to speak. For 34 years I thought we were partners. I thought we faced everything together. Now I look back and wonder what was real and what wasn't. Were you unhappy all along? Was I just too oblivious to notice? Too self-absorbed? I looked down at my hands. The worst part isn't even picturing you with him. It's the lies, the elaborate deception, the fact that you could come home from being with him and sit across from me at dinner, talking about your day as if nothing was happening. Kate was crying silently now, tears tracking down her cheeks. You mentioned feeling erased, Dr. Watson prompted. Can you elaborate on that? I nodded. Our marriage was the foundation of my identity, husband, partner, one half of a whole. Now I don't know who I am anymore. If I wasn't the person I thought I was to you, then who am I? The room was silent except for the soft ticking of a clock and Kate's muffled sobs. And how do you feel about Kate now? Dr. Watson asked. I finally looked directly at my wife. I'm angry. I'm hurt. I'm confused. I took a deep breath. But underneath all that, I still love her. That's what makes this so damn difficult. If I didn't care anymore, this would be simpler. Something shifted in Kate's expression, a flash of hope quickly tempered by the gravity of the moment. Michael, Dr. Watson said, one thing many people in your position struggle with is the question of why. Has that been on your mind? Constantly, I admitted. Kate has given her reasons, but they don't feel like enough to justify what happened. They weren't, Kate interjected, unable to hold back. Nothing justifies what I did. Dr. Watson nodded. Kate's right that nothing justifies betrayal. But understanding the vulnerability points in your marriage might help prevent future breaches of trust. Kate, would you be willing to elaborate on what you've shared about your reasons? Kate wiped her eyes and straightened her shoulders. I felt invisible, not just to Michael, but to the world. I turned 54 and suddenly realized I'd become background noise in my own life. Michael was finding new purpose in his consulting work, and I was just there, the reliable wife, the woman who kept our social calendar and remembered birthdays. She looked at me directly. When Edward paid attention to me, really saw me, it was intoxicating. It wasn't about sex, at least not at first. It was about feeling vital again. "That still doesn't explain the lies," I said, my voice tight. "I lied because I was ashamed," she said simply. "I knew what I was doing was wrong, but I couldn't stop. It was like an addiction to feeling important again. And the longer it went on, the harder it became to imagine confessing." Dr. Watson nodded thoughtfully. "This is actually quite common. Affairs often begin as attempts to meet unmet emotional needs, not primarily physical ones. The deception grows gradually, making it increasingly difficult to come clean." "So what now?" I asked, looking between Kate and the therapist. "How do we move forward from here?" "That depends on what you both want," Dr. Watson replied. "Rebuilding after infidelity is possible, but it requires commitment from both parties. Kate needs to rebuild trust through consistent transparency and accountability. You, Michael, need to decide if you're willing to work through the pain toward forgiveness." "And if I can't?" I asked quietly. "Then you make the best decision for your future welfare," she said. "But I encourage you not to make that decision from the height of your pain. Give the process time." As we left the session, Kate and I walked to our separate cars in silence. Just as I was about to get into mine, she spoke. "Thank you for going today, for being willing to try." I looked at her, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time since discovering the affair. She looked smaller somehow, diminished by guilt and uncertainty. "I'm not making any promises," I said, "but I'm here, aren't I?" She nodded, a sad smile briefly appearing. "Yes, you are." 2 months after discovering Kate's affair, I still hadn't moved back into our bedroom. We'd been to 12 counseling sessions. We'd had countless conversations, some productive, others devolving into tears or recriminations. We were stuck in limbo, not moving forward, not moving back. Then came the invitation to Robert and Susan Henderson's anniversary party. 40 years of marriage, celebrated at the country club where we'd all been members for decades. We'd known the Hendersons since our 20s. They were among our oldest friends. "Are we going together?" Kate asked as we sat at the kitchen table with our morning coffee, a ritual we'd managed to maintain despite everything. I hesitated. We hadn't appeared socially as a couple since before the affair. Our friends knew we were going through a rough patch, but no one knew the specific details. "I think we should," I said finally, "for Robert and Susan." Relief washed over Kate's face. "I'd like that." The night of the party, I found myself waiting at the bottom of the stairs as Kate came down in a deep blue dress I'd never seen before. Her hair was styled differently too, softer, more youthful. She looked beautiful, and the realization hit me with unexpected force. "You look nice," I said, the words inadequate for what I was feeling. "Thank you," she replied, a slight blush coloring her cheeks. "So do you." The drive to the country club was quiet, both of us nervous about our first public appearance. As we entered the ballroom, Susan Henderson immediately rushed over. "Kate, Michael, I'm so glad you could make it." She hugged us both, oblivious to the tension between us. "It's been too long since we've seen you two." "Wouldn't have missed it," I said, managing a genuine smile for our friend. 40 years is quite an achievement." "It is, isn't it?" Susan beamed. "Though you two aren't far behind." Kate and I exchanged a glance but said nothing. The evening progressed with forced normalcy. We circulated together, making small talk with familiar faces. Kate stayed close to me but was careful not to touch me, respecting the invisible boundary I'd established. I found myself watching her as she laughed with our friends, noting how her smile rarely reached her eyes now. The guilt was still there, a constant shadow. It was during the dinner that everything changed. We were seated at a table with 3 other couples, including the Hendersons. Robert stood to make a toast to his wife, his voice thick with emotion as he spoke about their 4 decades together. "It hasn't always been easy," he admitted, looking down at Susan. "We've had our storms. But what makes a marriage last isn't avoiding the hard times. It's choosing each other over and over again, especially when it would be easier not to." I felt Kate's eyes on me, but kept my gaze fixed on Robert. "To my beautiful Susan," he continued, raising his glass, "thank you for choosing me every day for 40 years. I promise to spend whatever time we have left trying to deserve it." The room erupted in applause and cheers. Glasses clinked. Couples leaned into each other, sharing private smiles. Kate and I sat motionless, the gulf between us suddenly more apparent than ever. After dinner, the band started playing, and couples moved to the dance floor. Robert and Susan led the way, laughing as they swayed together to a song from their youth. "Would you like to dance?" Kate asked hesitantly. I looked at her, this woman I'd spent my life with. This woman who had hurt me more deeply than I thought possible. This woman who was trying, day after day, to make amends. "Not tonight," I said quietly. Something broke in her expression. She nodded once, then stood abruptly. "Excuse me," she whispered, and walked quickly toward the exit. I watched her go, feeling the eyes of our friends on me. After a moment, I followed her. I found her outside on the terrace, arms wrapped around herself in the cool evening air, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Kate," I said softly. She turned, hastily wiping tears away. "I'm sorry. I just needed a minute." "Don't apologize," I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. "This is hard for both of us." "I know you're still angry," she said. "You have every right to be. But Michael, I can't live in this limbo forever. I need to know if there's any hope for us." Her question hung in the air between us, demanding an answer I wasn't sure I had. I looked at my wife's tear-streaked face, illuminated by the soft glow of the terrace lights. Behind us, the muffled sounds of celebration continued. Laughter, music, the clinking of glasses. A tribute to enduring love that now felt like a mockery of our broken marriage. "I don't know, Kate," I finally answered. "I honestly don't know if there's hope for us." She nodded, absorbing the blow. "At least that's honest." "I've been trying to figure it out for 2 months," I continued. "Some days I think we might make it. Other days I remember what happened and can't imagine ever moving past it." "What about today?" she asked quietly. "Right now?" The question caught me off guard. I hadn't been categorizing today, hadn't been actively deciding whether it fell into the hopeful or hopeless column. Today I trailed off, searching for the truth. "Today I saw you coming down the stairs in that blue dress, and for a second it was like before. Then I remembered, and it hurt all over again." "I hate that I did this to us," she whispered, "that I ruined something so precious." "I hate it too." My voice was rougher than I intended. "But Kate, I need to ask you something, and I need the absolute truth." She straightened, squaring her shoulders as if preparing for a blow. "Anything." Was there ever anyone else? In 34 years, was Edward the only one? The question had been gnawing at me for weeks. Once trust is broken, doubt seeps into everything, including the past you thought was secure. "He was the only one," she said without hesitation. "I swear to you, Michael, there was never anyone else before him." I studied her face, looking for any flicker of deception. I found none. "Thank you for that," I said. "I needed to know." She took a tentative step toward me. "Can I ask you something now?" I nodded. "If we hadn't run into each other at the gym that day, if you hadn't caught me, would we be here right now, at this party, like nothing had happened?" It was a question I'd asked myself many times. Would she have ended it on her own? Or would the deception have continued indefinitely? I don't think so, I said honestly. I think you would have kept seeing him. She flinched, but didn't deny it. I'd like to think I would have come to my senses eventually. But you don't know for sure, I pressed. No, she admitted. I don't. The truth hung between us, raw and painful. That's what I can't get past, Kate. Not just that you cheated, but that you lied so effectively that I never would have known if I hadn't stumbled upon that business card. I understand, she said, her voice barely audible, and I wouldn't blame you if you decided to end our marriage. But before you make that decision, I want you to know something. She reached for my hand. After a moment's hesitation, I let her take it. These past 2 months have been excruciating, she said, watching you hurt, knowing I caused it. But they've also been clarifying. I've had to face who I really am, the good and the terrible. I've had to examine what I truly want from the rest of my life. Her hand tightened around mine. And what I want, Michael, is you. Not because you're familiar or safe or because starting over at my age is terrifying, but because I love you. Because these months of nearly losing you have shown me how profoundly empty my life would be without you in it. I didn't pull my hand away, but I didn't respond either. Her words sounded genuine, but how could I trust them? I don't expect you to believe me right now, she continued. Words are cheap after what I've done. But if you give me the chance, I will spend every day proving it to you through actions. I will become trustworthy again. From inside, the band started playing a slower song. At Last, by Etta James, drifted through the open doors, the song we'd danced to at our wedding. Kate looked toward the music, then back at me, a sad smile on her face. Remember our first dance? Of course I do, I said. You stepped on my feet 3 times. And you didn't complain once, she said, a ghost of our old easiness surfacing. Without fully understanding my own impulse, I tugged gently on her hand. Come on. Where? She asked, confused. Dance with me, I said. Her eyes widened. Are you sure? I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but something about standing on that terrace, hearing our song while celebrating 4 decades of someone else's marriage, clarified things for me. Life was short, happiness was rare, and despite everything, this woman was still the center of my world. No, I answered truthfully. I'm not sure of anything right now, but I know I'm tired of living in limbo, so let's dance and see how it feels. She followed me onto the dance floor, trembling slightly as I placed my hand at her waist. We began to sway to the music, keeping a careful distance at first. Then, slowly, she moved closer, until her head was resting against my chest. I closed my eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of her perfume. It didn't fix anything. The pain was still there, the betrayal, the broken trust. But for the first time in 2 months, I could imagine a future where those things weren't all that existed between us. This doesn't mean I've forgiven you, I whispered into her hair. I know, she whispered back, but it's a start. The drive home from the anniversary party was different from the drive there. The silence wasn't tense anymore, but thoughtful. Kate's hand rested on the center console, and once, at a red light, I briefly placed mine over it. A small gesture, but it felt monumental. When we arrived home, neither of us immediately got out of the car. The house loomed before us, the place that had been both sanctuary and battlefield these past months. Thank you for dancing with me tonight, Kate said finally. It felt familiar, I admitted, in a good way. She smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her in weeks. It did, didn't it? Inside, we moved through our evening routine with less awkwardness than usual. Kate made tea while I locked up. We sat in the living room instead of retreating to separate spaces, as had become our habit. I've been thinking about what Robert said tonight, I said, cradling my mug, about choosing each other over and over again. Kate looked up, her face carefully neutral, waiting. I've spent the last 2 months deciding whether to leave, whether to stay, how to feel. I set my tea down. But maybe the problem is that I've been treating it as one big decision when really it's thousands of small ones. What do you mean? She asked. I mean that maybe I don't have to decide right now whether I can forgive you completely or whether our marriage will survive long term. Maybe I just need to decide each day whether I'm willing to keep trying that day. She considered this. And today? What did you decide? Today I decided to dance with you, I said simply. Tomorrow, we'll see. Kate nodded, understanding the weight of what I was offering. Not a grand forgiveness or a clean slate, but a willingness to take it one day at a time. Can I ask what changed? She ventured. Why tonight? I thought about it, trying to pinpoint the moment. Watching Robert and Susan tonight, I realized something. 40 years together doesn't happen because two people never hurt each other. It happens because when they do, they find a way to heal together. Do you think we can do that? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Heal together? I don't know, I answered honestly. But for the first time, I think I want to try. Kate set her mug down with trembling hands. When you said you couldn't get past my lies, that you couldn't trust me again, I understood. But Michael, I need you to know that the woman who did those things, who lied to you, who betrayed you, she's not who I want to be. She's not who I am when I'm my best self. I know, I said, surprising myself with the realization that I did know this. The Kate who had cheated wasn't the woman I'd spent most of my life with. She was a version of Kate who had lost her way, who had made terrible choices out of her own pain and confusion. These past 2 months, I continued, I've been so focused on what you did, I haven't really thought about why you did it, about feeling invisible. I can't excuse your choices, but I can understand that I might have contributed to the circumstances that led to them. That doesn't make it your fault, she said quickly. No, it doesn't. But it means there are things we both need to work on if we're going to move forward. Kate nodded, eyes bright with unshed tears. I'd like that. We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of possibility between us. I think I'm going to head up to bed, I said finally. Okay. Kate gathered our mugs. I'll just clean up down here. I stood at the foot of the stairs watching her move around the kitchen with familiar efficiency. Another small choice presented itself. Kate? She looked up. Yes? Would you... I hesitated, then pushed forward. Would you like to sleep in our room tonight, with me? Her eyes widened. Are you sure? Just to sleep, I clarified. I'm not ready for more than that, but I'm tired of the guest room. I'd like that, she said softly. Later, as we lay side by side in the bed we'd shared for decades, careful not to touch, I listened to Kate's breathing slowly even out as she fell asleep. The familiar sound brought an unexpected lump to my throat. We weren't fixed. We weren't even close. But for the first time since finding that business card on my car floor, I believed we might find our way back to each other. Not to what we were before. That was gone forever. But to something new, something hard-won, and perhaps even stronger. I closed my eyes and made another small choice, to hope. 6 months after the anniversary party, Kate and I stood in the driveway watching the movers load the last of our furniture into the truck. Our house of 23 years, the place where we'd raised our son, hosted countless holiday dinners, and weathered the storm of infidelity, was no longer ours. It feels strange, Kate said, leaning slightly against me, saying goodbye to this place. I put my arm around her shoulders. It does. The decision to sell the house had been mutual. Too many memories, both good and painful, resided within those walls. We needed neutral territory to continue rebuilding what had been broken. The lakeside condo we'd purchased was smaller, more manageable, with floor-to-ceiling windows that let in abundant natural light and offered views of the water. A new space for a new chapter. "Ready?" I asked, jingling the car keys. Kate nodded, taking one last look at the empty house before sliding into the passenger seat. The path to this moment had not been easy or straightforward. There had been setbacks, arguments, nights when the pain felt as fresh as the day I'd discovered the affair. Dr. Watson had warned us it would be like this. Healing is rarely linear. About a month after the Hendersons' party, I'd hit another low point. Walking through a shopping mall, I'd spotted a fitness studio and was suddenly overwhelmed by mental images of Kate with Edward. I'd come home seething, picking a fight over something trivial that escalated into a full-blown argument about trust and forgiveness. "I don't know if I can ever truly forgive you," I'd shouted, giving voice to my deepest fear. "Maybe you can't," Kate had responded, her voice quiet but steady. "But I'm not asking for forgiveness on my timeline. I'm just asking you not to give up." Her response had disarmed me. It acknowledged the legitimacy of my pain while gently requesting permission to keep trying. It was one of many moments where Kate's patient determination to rebuild what she'd damaged touched something deep inside me. There were brighter moments, too, a weekend trip to a bed and breakfast where, for the first time since the affair, we made love. It had been tentative, almost shy, like new lovers rather than a couple who had known each other's bodies for decades. Afterward, Kate had cried, not from guilt, but from relief. "I thought we might never have this again," she'd whispered. Dr. Watson had suggested we establish new traditions, activities that belonged solely to our healing process rather than our past. We started taking long walks every Sunday morning, just the two of us, talking about everything and nothing. During these walks, I found myself able to ask questions I'd been afraid to voice before. "Do you ever think about him?" I asked one crisp fall morning, my breath visible in the cold air. Kate had considered the question carefully. "Not in the way you're worried about," she'd answered. "Sometimes I think about how close I came to losing everything that matters for something that ultimately meant nothing. It terrifies me." Her honesty was both painful and reassuring. We were learning to speak difficult truths to each other without either defensive anger or excessive guilt, a skill we'd never fully mastered in the first 3 decades of our marriage. The drive to our new condo was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. As we pulled into the parking garage, Kate reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what?" "For giving us another chance, for not walking away when you had every right to." I turned off the engine, but made no move to get out of the car. "I almost did, walk away." "I know," she acknowledged. "There were days I was sure you would." "What stopped me wasn't just love," I admitted. "It was also fear. Fear of starting over at 58. Fear of being alone after a lifetime of being part of a pair." "That's understandable," she said. "Does it matter why you stayed, as long as you did?" I thought about this. Maybe not. But I want you to know that's not why I'm still here now. Her eyes met mine, questioning. "I'm here now because I choose to be," I explained. "Because despite everything, you're still the person I want to build a life with. Because I've learned that you can love someone deeply, be hurt by them profoundly, and still find your way back to each other if you're both willing to do the work." Tears welled in Kate's eyes. "I don't deserve you." "It's not about deserving," I said, echoing something Dr. Watson had told us repeatedly. "It's about choosing, and I choose us, Kate. Not just today, but every day I wake up next to you." We sat in silence for a moment, letting the weight of the words settle around us. "Should we go see our new home?" Kate finally asked. "Yeah," I said. "Let's do that." The condo was a blank canvas, fresh paint, empty rooms waiting to be filled with carefully chosen pieces from our old life and new items we would select together. We walked through each space, planning where furniture would go, which windows needed curtains, where we'd hang our favorite photographs. In the master bedroom, Kate paused, looking out at the lake. "Do you think we'll be happy here?" she asked. It was a question that went beyond geography. She was really asking if happiness was still possible for us after everything we'd been through. "I think happiness isn't a place," I said, moving to stand beside her. "It's a practice, something we choose to cultivate together." She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. "When did you get so wise?" "Right around the time my life fell apart and I had to figure out how to put it back together," I said wryly. We both laughed, a genuine, spontaneous sound that would have seemed impossible a few months ago. Later that evening, with the movers gone and our bed set up but little else, we sat on the floor of our new living room eating take-out Chinese food. Through the windows we could see the lake reflecting the sunset, the water shifting from blue to gold to deep purple. "I have something for you," Kate said, setting aside her container. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small wrapped package. "What's this?" "A housewarming gift. Open it." Inside was a simple silver frame. Behind the glass was a business card, the same one I'd found on my car floor a year ago, the card that had changed everything. I looked at Kate questioningly. "I know it seems strange," she said, "but I wanted us to have it, to remember." "Remember the worst moment of our marriage?" I asked, confused. She shook her head. "Remember that even when things seem broken beyond repair, they might not be. Remember how close we came to losing each other, so we never take what we have for granted again." I turned the frame over in my hands, seeing the object differently now, not just as evidence of betrayal, but as a marker of where our new beginning had started. "Thank you," I said. "I think I understand." Kate moved closer, and I put my arm around her. Outside, the last light faded from the sky, and the first stars appeared above the lake. "Do you think we made the right decision?" she asked. "Staying together? Trying again?" I looked around at our half-empty condo, at the woman beside me who had hurt me deeply, and then worked tirelessly to heal that hurt, at the new life we were building one careful day at a time. "Yes," I said with certainty, "I do." The business card that had once represented the end of everything now marked a beginning. Not the unquestioning trust of our first 34 years, but something different, a relationship tempered by fire, more fragile in some ways but stronger in others. A love chosen with eyes wide open, aware of all its imperfections but committed to it nonetheless. We weren't the same people who had exchanged vows all those years ago. We had hurt each other, disappointed each other, nearly lost each other. But here we were, still choosing each other, day after day, and in the end, maybe that's what love is. Not a perfect, unbroken path, but the courage to find your way back to each other when you've lost your way.